Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're looking at making a barrel, so pay attention. So first of all, it's good to get a reference of what object you're creating. So just open up Chrome here and let's type in what a wooden barrel would look like. Now there's always many ways you can actually create one of these, but I'm going to see if I can show you one of the shorter ways, and you can get the wooden planks on the inside. This tutorial I saw some years ago, but you know, based on the evolution of Blender and a few things, you might want to create something that's a little different. Right, so if you look at all these different examples, these are all different barrels, how barrels might look. This is a 3D model, of course, but a realistic one looks more like this. So good to get a reference to know exactly what it is you're creating in terms of shape and look and feel, so that when we actually create it, it will look somewhat similar. So we have a few things to do. One is getting the plank to look about right, and then also putting on these metal rings that go around it, and also the little cork that fits in there. So we'll use this as a reference. We might not get all the details in unless we really have to spend some time on it, but at least by the end of this tutorial, you should know how to make something that looks relatively similar to this. So first of all, one modifier that you're going to be introduced to is your array modifier. And let me just kind of give you a preview of the array modifier by itself. One, when you select an object, first of all, like our cube, and add an array modifier, which is here, what it does is that it adds to the count. So by default, you have 1, and you can increase that count. You can even set the offset to be more off, whether it be the X or the Y, or even Z, right? So it's always X, Y, Z. So if you set the offset, you can change the way things offset from one another. So if, example, you want to create some stairs, let me just shrink this for a little bit, S, Z, and let's say we wanted some floating stairs, it'll offset from the Z axis, going like this, right? So let's say you have that. The more you increase the count, the further up it goes. So that's based on just your X and Z. Of course, if you want to go left to right, you can always play with the offset, right? So that's relative offset, and that's also based on a count value. You can also have start cap and end cap, which I'll probably have to create another object to kind of explain that. So what I'll do is I'm going to create one more object. We'll make it look like perhaps a cube, like so, except I'm going to do a few more things to it. Let's just bring up the top. So example, I'll create, I'm going to cut it. So let me turn on my screencast keys there. So let's create a few cuts. I'm going to use the knife tool. I haven't shown you guys this yet, but press K and you can actually cut lines through your faces or your edges or your faces. So that's going to create for me one vertex there. So I'm going to pull this up like so, and you get something looking like that. So this could potentially be our end. So if we look here, we have start cap and end cap, and I'll just kind of hide this or move it to another layer so you can't see it on this one. So for start cap, I'm going to set this to be cube, and if you look at it here, it actually shrinks as well. So if we were to set the start cap to be that and the end cap to be the same, you can get a start cap and an end cap that look like this. Of course, if we wanted to, let's set this back to its normal size. So currently, this is at, in terms of scale, it's actually at 111. If you look on this one, in terms of its location, rotation, and scale is actually really small. So if I set this back to 1, now you kind of have an idea of what that's really doing there. So you have start cap and end cap, really just changes the whole thing. So if you're creating like a fence, you could have the main spokes at the front and at the end, and you can create something relatively decent. So you could get something like this, and even if you increase their count, the end cap stays the same. So you could build a wall if you wanted to, like so, right? So that's how the mirror modifier works. The next one I'm going to be showing you is the curve. So Blender has more than just meshes to work with. You have also curves. So I'm going to just add a curve here, and I'll make my curve into a circle because that's the easiest thing to start with. And I'm going to set this curve to center. So cursor to center first, and then selection to cursor. So I'll scale this up so we get a shape like this. Now a modifier you can add to this is known as your curve modifier. What it does is actually attaches what you currently have to a curve. So if I add modifier and choose in terms of deform curve, I'll choose my curve as Bezier circle, and it will conform whatever I have to a curve. Right? You can also change the deformation axis, so X, Z, and all these different ones. So it's really up to what you want to create. But I stick to X because most times it gives me the result I want based on what I have already. Right, so that's just an example of the two modifiers that we'll be using for the barrel creation. There's one more, but I'll say that until we actually reach that part. So first of all, let's create a new document. And what we're going to be doing is creating the first plank to our wooden barrel. Right, so one plank. So let's scale up, or zoom in rather. I'll turn on my screencast keys again so you can see the shortcuts I'm using. Alright, so first things first. If I'm scaling, I don't want to really scale on object mode because this is going to change the scale of my object itself. See, if I scale X like so, it changes the scale of my object. In edit mode, however, if I do scale, example S on X to create, for example, one plank, and I scale up on Z, maybe scale in on Y, SY, right? So we're creating one plank for our barrel there. When I look at my scale, it's still 1, 1, 1 because we're actually not changing the object size. It's just modifying the mesh as far as Blender is concerned. Right, so I'm going to create a few cuts in here. To create a loop cut, it's Control R. If you want to, you can always hit loop cut and slide and navigate to one of the edges. And if you mouse wheel up, you can create more in terms of your shape there. So I'm going to increase it to about 5, right? Number of cuts, 5. And I also want to put some at the tippity top. Well, I won't. If anything, I'll just bevel it. So now we're going to have this. Just one single plank that begins our little thing here. So let's scale this up. S on Z. Carry this up like so. And what we just need to do now is add a modifier. Same as before, add modifier and choose your array modifier. Now, right now our array modifier is actually going on the x-axis because we actually scaled it that way. So what I'll do is just come back into edit mode because I kind of want them sideways and I really don't want to mess with the mesh, but I'll keep it along the x-axis. So I'm going to rotate on Z 90 degrees till we get them side by side. Or if you want to, we can always rotate it again another 180 degrees. So let's see what that does. Well, nothing really. So now we have this shape here and they're really touching really close. So we can actually set the offset from just 1 to slightly above 1. Right, so we can just create just a tiny little slot there. That's necessary to create some amount of groove. So we're going to create a few more, or a lot more rather, and it really depends on the size that the barrel you're actually making. So let's look at it, barrel plank. Right, so if you look at it, a barrel plank, they give you that size, about that long. So you could always make your barrel about the same length. And if I look at mine, I think it's okay, but I can always scale it up some more. Right? You'll notice that it actually has a curve, but we won't worry about the curve until a little later. So we have that shape. Let's add ourselves the other modifier, which is the curve. We actually haven't created a curve as yet, so you won't see anything in the objects. So let's go to add, curve, and circle. Now, remember I said before in other videos that by default, whatever you created is created at the cursor. So you have to be mindful of that. So I'm creating the curve on the very center point of the world, and I'm just going to scale it up so it's like this. Then I'll take this, my object is going to be Bezier curve, and so it's going to naturally curve around that. And we can always go back to the array modifier and add a few more. Right, so I'll just keep going around. Now you have an option here that says fixed count. You also have fit curve, but this option hardly ever seems to work for me, but it seems to be working now. So what I'll do for my curve, let's select that, scale out. Right, just scale it out enough so it fits. So that can actually work for me as I have it. And that's where we reach so far. So the other part of it now is creating these little wooden metal bars there that you have. Right? So before we actually get to that, let's curve this thing. There's yet one more modifier you can add to this, and that is called a lattice. A lattice actually allows you to deform your mesh, and by default you can't even see it. So let's look for that lattice. Well, we don't actually have a lattice object, so let's go add. We have a lattice. Lattice will create me a shape like so. So what I'll do, go inside that shape and just scale it on Z, SZ, so it's a little bigger than the shape we have, and S shift Z so it goes out on X and Y. Ideally what it's doing is creating for me a deformation mesh. So I'm going to select this as well and increase the subdivisions for the same. So right now it's at 2, 2, 2 for all of them, UVW, and we just increase that to 3, 3, 3. Now you can see where it actually is going. So the truth and fact, we only need probably some for not this, but this one, but not that one, more for W. So let's increase the amount for W, and let us go back on our modifiers. So we'll add a modifier here, same lattice as before. Click on lattice. Right now it looks like this because the whole thing is really rectangular. So let's increase the subdivisions for this one as well. So you have all these shapes, we don't want them. Oops. Let's see how this works out. U and W. So here's how this thing works. On the lattice object, you select the sides you want deform and you scale it out, and it pulls them out like so. So we just need to do this very same thing for the others, and you can just see what's going on here. The barrel is actually being deformed. So S shift Z to scale it on X and Y, and just get that barrel shape that you want. Right? So that's what the lattice object does. It creates that shape, and let's see if it works. Let's look in front view. It's a really wide barrel, so what we could probably do is, let's see if the lattice object can be scaled. Well, we don't really want to do that still, so what we'll have to end up doing is scaling the barrel itself. So SZ, just to create that more, and you get somewhat more of a shape like so. So let's scale up that lattice object. There we go, and get something more like this. So now it looks like a barrel, like one of these, right? So the shape is there. If you look at it, you can still see all those different things. And what we could do, if you want to smooth it out some more, is that we could hit the smooth shading option. And one of the things you want to make sure of is that you make your normals consistent. So I'm going to hit spacebar. I'll type in the word normals. And there's one that says make normals consistent, right? And another thing you want to do, well, we could always increase the subdivision surface on this. But what I'll do instead is I'll add a modifier to the stack, and I'll add one called bevel. The bevel is going to give us a shape like this, and we can always increase the number of segments to increase the resolution a bit. So it looks more like that. And we can even change the width to be much less. So it looks more like that. So now the wood actually has a very smooth edge, right? So let's change that, move this bevel up the stack, right? So it looks a little smoother, and right below that, subdivision surface, right? So simple versus cap mold mark, and change the views, make it adaptive. None of these seem to be working exactly how I want it. So you just carry this up, and you can see as you carry it closer to the stack, it smooths out the whole thing. So that's what you get right there. Of course, we're not going to apply any of these just as yet because we're not finished with the barrel just as yet. So let's get the metal rims around it. So we're going to front orthographic view. Let's create a new mesh. This one's going to be a circle, and a circle by default is that small. So we're going to edit mode, scale that till it's around the shape we have. And a circle typically tends to be empty. So what we'll have to do is extrude it on Z. So E, then Z to get that shape. And what I'll do is grab the whole thing, just increase the thickness of that a bit. And we'll have 1, 2, 3 up here, 1, 2, 3 down here. And so what I'll be doing is just extruding it again and scaling it in on itself by scaling and shift Z, so it scales only on X and Y. So now you get a shape much like this, which is not quite working for me because it's coming outside the barrel or going through the barrel. So I'll scale this out again till you get something similar to this. Once you're satisfied with that, we can smooth the shading out, and also we can even add our bevel to this as well. So lower the width of the bevel, right? And increase number of segments so it's smoother, and add a subdivision surface, right? So you could always play with the subsurf above the shape, but you won't get exactly what you want. So let's just move that down and smooth that. Right, doesn't seem to be working the way I want it to work. Blender feels like it wants to crash. Oh no! So let's close this and remove that. We'll just work with this for now because it seems to be fine. What I can do is Control R to add me a cut here. Control R to add me a cut here. So now we have that shape. Let's move this up a bit, shall we? So what I'll do, let me just hide a few things because too much of this amazingness is making Blender slow down a bit. So I'll leave the bevel on, I'll leave the array on, and I'll leave the curve on. So let's work with this shape. So I'm going to scale it back down. So I'll highlight everything. Well, I'll highlight the ring and scale it in like so. I'll put one here. Well, let me do this instead. Go into edit mode with this ring, highlight it, shift D, carry it up on Z, Shift D again, carry it up on Z till we get that shape. Then for the next 3 rings, highlight everything by pressing A and duplicate them and move them up on that. What I'll do to get the same evenness is I could rotate them based on our view 180 degrees. Right? It comes out perfect. So let's move this up a bit till we get that. Now in this one, the top ones are a lot thicker and the middle one is spaced out from the center one. So what we'll do is just kind of copy that. I'll move these in closer or move this one out more. So GZ and pressing L selects loose ends. So grab that on Z, pull this up. Same thing here. L, G, Z. Pull that down there and grab this. So we have a shape like this now. Right, so that's the shape we have. Very simple looking barrel. Now we need to get it to conform to the same lattice that we have here. So if you realize on this object here, we have a lattice that gives it that shape. What we need to do, not just for the lattice, but also for this one, we add a modifier, same lattice, and we apply the same lattice to it. It's going to come out very curved, much like we have here. And all we need to do is highlight the barrel, turn it back on, and you get that shape like that. So it's coming along still, right? Barrel shape is there. You know, it looks like a barrel now. So the only other thing we need to do is just put some covers on there. And if we need to, apply everything so that the whole model can come together. But there's one thing I want to do before I do all of this stuff. I like to, let us do a wooden texture on this barrel. So I'm going to hide a few more things again. So let me just hide this layer for now, just temporarily. And hide this lattice for now by pressing H. And let's just zoom in a little close to it. Right, so we could, first of all, let's create a wooden texture. So I'll create a new material. I'll just make it a little brown for now, so it can show up here in that same color. And use nodes. So I'll call this wood, wood, barrel, and let's find a texture for a wooden barrel. Seamless wood texture. One of the websites I recommend highly for wooden textures is this one, textures.com. It's still there, so just log into it if you don't already have an account. Oh no, I forgot my password. Well, that's embarrassing. Third time's a charm. Alright, so let's enter keyword wood. Right? So you have a whole bunch of options when you choose wood, but we want something looking like this, and this says seamless in a nice. So you could always go for any of these seamless ones. No thank you. But when you click on it, just make sure it's free. So here we go. Consists of 12 images and I can get them for free. So free credits, premium only. You know, I don't mind using the cheaper one, so I download that stuff. It's a TIFF file. I'll throw it in my downloads for now. Save. Now, one of the things I forgot to do so far is let's save what we have so far. Save as, and I'll just throw this in here. Barrel. Barrel. Ta-da. Now, the image we have, the one that we downloaded a while ago, is a TIFF file. If you're wondering what a TIFF file is actually a layered file. usually. So if we throw it into Photoshop, depending on the type of file it is, it might have different layers. So we already got the TF, the seamless one. The reason why we got seamless is because if it does tile, you don't want to look like some weird thing. It just must look like it meshes together and doesn't break the image itself. So Photoshop now open. Let's just drag this TIFF file into Photoshop and see what we get. Oh. Well, Photoshop is doing its thing. While that's cooking, let's jump back to Blender. So the idea is for this particular wooden texture, we get it to have a wooden texture on there for this particular mesh, so that when it actually goes around, it looks like one seamless piece of wood. So Photoshop's still playing around with that thing. So let's continue. For now, let's just apply a few things to it, such as let's get the preview first of all, and let's change the surface. Now, believe it or not, if you want to, you could add some textures to it, create your own textures for the wood, but I would rather use a UV map. So if we look inside here, all we have is this picture, so we'll work with what we have. And for the barrel, let's come back into Blender. For the color, we'll use image texture, open, and let's go to where we have our downloads file. Let's look for one that we have. So here we are. So open image, and right now it says it looks like this, but in Blender it really doesn't, only because we haven't actually unwrapped it as yet. So if you press U and go into object edit mode, first of all we hit U, unwrap, and in texture mode, let's see what we get. Texture mode gives us this thing where it keeps, looks like cardboard based on the direction of the grain. So let's change that. Hit UV editing, click on the image you loaded up, and for this particular one, in edit mode, you have to look at it in edit mode. I'm going to unwrap it as cube projection or smart UV project, whichever one. Once you have that, it's going to show you the whole thing. So it's giving you an unwrap based on a few things. So if I choose face selection mode here, you can see that corresponds to that face, and this to that one, that to this face, and this to this face, and that to this face. So it's actually going down very thinly. So I'm going to scale this like a fish. Alright, first of all, let's change the direction. So R, 90 degrees, and let's look at this in texture mode, so you can see exactly what's happening there. So that's what it looks like. It's doing a thing. So if we rotate this like so, it looks better for us. R90, and because it's seamless, it'll look like this. However, if you want the wood texture to come out a little bit more, we can scale it on the x-axis like so, and you get something more like this. So I'm just gonna pull this over here, right, angles X like so, and it comes out like this. Next one is back to default view. So now you have that, right? Now let's show what we actually do have by turning on the lights for all the things we put on there. They all look exactly the same, which is probably one of the most annoying things to do. But if you're going to be very detailed with it, what I would recommend is after you unwrap everything, you detail every single plank individually. That way it comes out more realistic. So we'll do that afterwards. So let's get the other things to show up. So if I open my organizer outliner here, click on that, and we have these shapes to deal with, and lattice doesn't need to be seen. So let's play with the texture for the rings, create a new one, and change that from diffuse to probably something glossy. but you don't want to be too glossy. So let's look for, well, we're on the right website already. So let's look for metal. And we'll just pick one that works. This works. Looks good. Right, here we go. Let's pick that one. Seamless. And this is a substance beta file, so we just work with this one here. And we'll choose one of the free credits one. Cost 1 credit. Boom. Save that. So we already know it's going to be working. So let's change the one. I'm going to change not this time the image, but I want to change the roughness. Roughness can actually take on a image texture. So here's what I'm going to do. If we look at it as it is, it looks very, very, very shiny. What we need to do is change it. So for the color, first of all, just because I want to see what the color looks like, I am going to go to image texture, pick one and open it. And let's just navigate back to our downloads file, wherever we got the file, and just pick this one. Alright, so it looks like this now. Right now you won't see anything there because we haven't actually unwrapped it. So if we unwrap the whole thing and you Smart UV project, press OK. Let's see what we get in terms of unwrapping. So UV editing, and we get all of that stuff there. And this is the material that we're going to be using. So I don't like this particular one. So what I'll do is highlight the whole thing, choose unwrap, and see what we get again. So blah blah blah, etc. So I'm going to work with what they call a cylinder projection. So we get exactly this, and even though you're seeing this right now, it actually is being conformed to the shape of that. Now the reason why it's like this is it's going around each individual one. So in order to get a more, how do you say, a better looking look, we'll highlight the whole thing and scale it out on the x-axis so it stretches out like this. That way the material looks a little more decent. Right, once you know the material looks like this, and like I said, you're currently dealing with just the way it looks. So we don't actually want to put a material on there to be shiny. We also want to play with the roughness as well, in terms of how glossy it is. And the roughness should be based on the same image texture. So we just pick this. The cool thing about setting up your UV maps is that after you set your UV maps, based on your current UV maps, it's going to conform to that particular same one. So when we actually show it again, the roughness value looks quite similar to the diffuse. And you can also play with the value of it. Last but not least is just creating a cover for the top part. And I'll just create one cover. We just use a mesh circle. And well, let's center that first. Shift S, cursor to center, and selection to cursor. And what we'll do is just move that up. So let's go into edit mode first and scale the whole thing. And we'll go into edit mode again. But let's change it from face selection to edge selection mode. So we have the whole thing selected. Let's extrude it to create a face. Scale it in. E, scale in. That's how I like to scale my stuff in. Scale it in like so. And finally one more. E, click, Alt M, merge at center. And last but not least is just to extrude again in that direction. Tab. So now we want the wooden texture on top of this one. Best way to do it, go in top view. And you know, because we want this to have the same exact texture as the wooden one that we have, we'll go to new material, And instead of using one of the materials that we're creating new, let's just pick the same old wooden barrel one. By default though, if we look at it from this angle, it has not been unwrapped. So let's do the same thing again. So we go to our UV editing workspace and hit top view, which is numpad 7, and I'm going to just unwrap from view, protect from view, like so, which gives me that shape. Then all I need to do is just open up the wooden plank one, scale it up, and what happens is when you look at it from here, it looks more like that. So we could always scale it up a little bit more if you want the material to be smaller, if you want to be about that size, right? And you can get that shape. So all in all, that's how you model a wooden barrel. Now we could spend more time and effort trying to get it look more realistic, but essentially I'll leave that to another tutorial so we can get more details. So let's save this and just kind of play with the look and feel of it. So I'll just play with that, you know, zoom out a little bit more. Right, let's create a floor for this whole composition. Plane, scale it up, scale up some more, carry this down. Let's just make sure it's down too far. There we go. So it looks like this. Now we could light the scene if we want to, and I will. Playing with a few materials that we're already familiar with. Let's create one more plane. So I usually like creating two lights. One is going to be a warm colored light. So new, warm, make it light yellowish, orangish. Right, and it's going to be not diffuse but emission. And let's just increase that value to see what it looks like from the top. Looks like a lot of light coming in from that direction. Let's rotate this like so. I'm going to move it behind the camera a bit. We're going to rotate it slightly like so, and rotate it. Well, let's rotate RY first, and then RZ. And pull it behind the camera, of course. So there we go, one warm light. And let's put in a cool light. Shift D, rotate that like so, and create a new material based on the old one. Call this cool. Change this to something on the opposite end of the spectrum, and probably lower the intensity. So now you get this. And that's a barrel, people. That's how you make one. Of course, you can always play with the UV mapping and change the way that looks. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something. Bye.